Hello there. Brits need to wrap up warm. According to a new forecast, the cost of electricity and gas could triple in the coming year from current levels. As the consulting company Auxilione announced on Saturday, the state price cap for electricity and gas for an average household should, according to their estimates, be raised to £6,000 by April. The current annual energy bill cap is just under £2,000 and is already significantly higher than last autumn when it was £1,400. By how much the energy bill may rise from October is to be announced by the Supervisory Authority of Germany as early as next week. People expect something like 4,500. It's already expected that millions of households will only be able to heat to a limited extent in winter because they can no longer afford the high costs. It was only on Friday that the NHS Confederations, the Association of Healthcare Providers, warned of health risks for large parts of the population and called on the government to take action. The promised aid of £400 per household is far from enough to keep a large part of the population from sliding into fuel poverty, meaning that they spend more than 10% of their income on energy costs. And that's a big one. Britain is heading for a difficult winter. According to the latest date, the consumer price index rose to 10.1% in July. This is not only the highest value in almost 40 years, it is also by far the highest value within the G7 countries. For comparison, in Germany, the inflation rate is currently 7.5%. In France, it's 6.1%. The UK has experienced double-digit inflation only 3 times in the past 70 years. During the Korean War in the 1950s and after the two oil price shocks in the 1970s. This price increase did not come as a complete surprise, though. The Bank of England predicted weeks ago that inflation could rise to over 13% this year. However, the unexpectedly sharp rise in prices already in July suggests that inflation could exceed this figure. Data from the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, shows that prices rose in 9 of the 12 categories from which the ONS calculates the consumer price index in July. Particularly serious is the prices of goods within the manufacturing industry because they rose by more than 17% within a year. That's the highest increase in 45 years. This suggests that there will be further delayed price increases later in the year. Services have also become more expensive. Prices rose by 5.7% in July. In June, it was still 5.2%. In view of the developments, the Bank of England and its boss Andrew Bailey are increasingly coming under criticism. Critics accuse the central bank, which has operated independently of the government since 1998, of having overslept the developments after the end of the lockdowns. Supporters of Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, who is in polls well ahead in the race for the Tory party leadership and is likely to become Prime Minister in September, have suggested in recent days that Truss could overturn the independence of the Bank of England, and she already had that idea earlier as well. I talked about it. Superficially, the criticism of the central bank seems justified. After all, its mandate is to keep inflation at around 2%. Their boss rejects such allegations. I don't know anyone who can reasonably say that a year ago they could have predicted a war in Ukraine. That's what Andrew Bailey said in a recent press conference. The Bank of England had previously stated that there had to be a recession for the inflation rate to fall again. A recession is also likely to become unavoidable if, as expected, the central bank raises the key interest rate further in September from the current 1.75%. The Bank of England can hardly do much more anyway. Critics have been pointing out for years that the Western central banks have hardly had the means to intervene effectively in the event of major upheavals due to their ultra-low interest rate policy since the financial crash in 2008. Effective government intervention is also not to be expected before the change in Downing Street. Parliament is currently on its summer recess, and the incumbent Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who after his fall a few weeks ago insisted on remaining in office until a successor was appointed, was cited in Greece a few days ago, and I talked about his dancing. Apparently, it's his second vacation in 2 weeks, and so far, his two possible successors have not offered any serious solutions to the crisis. The fact that inflation in Great Britain is already higher than in all other industrialized nations is probably due to Brexit, because, among other things, it has caused trade with the EU to collapse and is thus contributing to rising prices. Adam Posen, head of the Patterson Institute for International Economics, believes that 80% of Britain's higher inflation rate is due to Brexit. Numerous experts are also certain that the country will find it more difficult to cope with the consequences of the impending recession due to the economic losses associated with Brexit. The rapidly rising energy prices are having a particularly strong impact on the inflation rate. There is a price cap in Great Britain that regulates how deep the electricity and gas providers are allowed to dig into their customers' pockets. I talked about this in the beginning of the video. However, the regulatory authority responsible, Ofgem, is continually raising this limit and obviously doing so primarily in the interest of the suppliers. The average household spending rose from around 1,200 to 1,900 a year last October. The cost is forecast to rise to over 35 or 45 in October and an astronomical 6,000 next year. Christine Farnish, who sat on the board of Ofgem, resigned a few days ago in protest at the planned price increases. The regulator didn't strike the right balance between the interests of consumers and those of the companies, as was Farnish said when she resigned. So far, the government has only helped consumers with a few measures. As I said, there is a one-off payment to all households of £400, and further grants for poorer households and pensioners who receive heating subsidies. The exploding energy prices are making a decisive contribution to the rapidly rising inflation. Researchers at the University of York believe that more than half of British households could be pushed into fuel poverty by the turn of the year. On Friday, as I already said, the British health sector even warned of an impending humanitarian crisis due to the rapidly rising cost of living. This mixed situation is already causing a noticeable increase in resentment. There are already more and more protests and strikes, which the Conservative government is demonstratively and aggressively opposing. Calls for a boycott of electricity and gas bills from October are increasing on social media. Great Britain's best-known savings expert, Martin Lewis, recently even warned of real unrest. We have to feed the people, we have to keep them warm. That's what Lewis said in an interview. And he said, if we get this wrong now, we are going to get to the point where we risk civil unrest. And I don't think we're very far from it. I can only hope for the sake of the people that is not that true, but I know they have to do something if the government doesn't. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.